right, Dr. Ramsey, it's a pleasure to have you on the Black Fundraisers Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
It's not often that I get to have a conversation with a musician, composer, author, historian. I mean, my goodness, the list continues here. So this promises to be a really, really rich conversation. But for starters, tell the good people listening a fun and little known facts about yourself.
Well, when I got that question originally, I asked someone, what do you think a fun, interesting fact is about me? And they mentioned something I would not have thought about. And that is
what was that?
It was that I played baseball until I was about 50 years old. And I co-owned the baseball team. And, it was a senior league, over 29. Yeah. So I had as much fun as I could until the fun ran out.
Okay, you said until you were about 50, you played baseball.
Yes.
And you consider that a senior, because there's some people on here that say, okay, that doesn't sound like a senior league to me, that might not necessarily put themselves in that category. So you talk a little bit more about this senior league.
Well, when they say senior baseball league, they have one that was 29 and up, right?
Okay.
And, it's volunteer and just, guys who wanted to keep playing and, and in a competitive environment, organized competitive environment. And I did that every Sunday for many years. And I hung up the spurs when I turned 50.
I heard that. You were playing baseball any given Sunday, huh?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
That's a fun and little known fact. When did you stop sliding? That's what I want to know.
I think that last slide is what did it.
Because those slides get mean. I got a baseball player in the other room here. And, those slides are what, make the difference sometimes. A lot of times, not sometimes, a lot of the time, you got to have a mean slide. You got to be willing to get down with the get down.
And here's the problem with all of that is that I am a pianist.
Right.
And, if you sliding, hands first, you are kind of taking things.
Right.
It's a little risky. And I think
risky.
What happened is that I had an injury, and when you're young, those injuries, they heal fast.
Yeah.
But you at 50 and up, you're not bouncing. It doesn't bounce back. 40 and up,
you don't bounce back. Okay,
right,
well, that sure is an interesting and fun fact. So, like I said, good people listening, if you're not familiar with this brother, do the research. This is a treasure trove here. Like he shared, pianist, musician, composer, brother knows some things. And with that, we want to tap that brain trust. We like to tap folks' brain trust on the Black Fundraisers Podcast. So with that, Dr. Ramsey, I want to explore musical crossroads with you. Okay, and I want to go back to the motherland and look at how African origins and even Black lived experience in America shaped music of the country, music that we know and love, right? So if you would take us on that journey, I'm all ears, and the good people listening are all ears.
Well, thank you. I just like to say that we know about the history of the slave trade in the Western Hemisphere. And what is often not understood, however, is that along with that mass movement of bodies, there was also a mass movement of culture.
Yes.
That these were not empty vessels waiting to be filled with the quote unquote civilization of the West. They had their own civilizations, cultures, languages, music, and food, and much philosophies and much more that they brought into this horrific situation. And when we talk about music specifically, what happened is that the musical forms and ways of the colonists were certainly combined and affected profoundly by the
Mm.
music of the Africans who were enslaved during the trade. One of the first places that impacted was in the Christian hymns of the Protestant church,
Okay.
where you see, and what occurred at that point was the hymns were being forced upon the enslaved, because they were trying to Christianize them. But
Okay.
guess what? Guess what happened? We took those the forms and the lyrics and the rhythms and the melodies and made them our own. And one of the
Mm.
first popular musics to hit these shores was that of the Negro spiritual.
Yes. Is that why my goodness, have you ever had this experience where if you're around the right group of folks and you sing some of those spirituals, there's something that you feel there? I can't really describe it. Maybe you could describe it if you get what I'm getting. There's something to be said about, it's like a present. I'm not trying to get creepy, creep anybody out, but there's something that you can feel there, right? Give me one, for instance, one of the old Negro spirituals that comes to mind.
Well, one would be keep your hands on the plow and hold on.
Okay.
That's a favorite. And what you have in those songs are all of the experiences, all of the historical and cultural memories that have been passed down through the generations, particularly through oral transmission. So you're not just passing along notes and tones and rhythms. You are passing along entire spiritual worlds and of the structures of feeling and the pushing against hardships that are embedded in these songs. So if you are experiencing that, it is precisely what those songs were intended to do.
Absolutely. Follow the drinking gourd.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
For instance, my goodness. So I'm feeling as though there's the resistance even in that, like there's a strong current of resistance even in that, because we acknowledge that there was some proselytization going on with, Christianity, right? So if I'm going to embrace this faith and this religion, but I'm still going to do it and own it and celebrate it and do it my way, right? Like that's what I'm getting. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So these songs can perform as many functions as we assign to them. So you can have a Christian hymn, let's say, sung in the Black church that is absolutely affirming the Christian faith, but it doesn't stop there. It is also doing this double work of affirming the social bonds that created the African-American experience. So you're getting all of that. And depending on your own personal experience with these songs, you're also dragging those meanings along to it. So it's not just a song, it's Absolutely. A life world.
Absolutely not. So let's continue this journey. I'm intrigued here.
Happy to go with you. Let's go for a ride.
Let's go. So from the old Negro spirituals, right? Where's the next stop on the bus? I want to traverse a little bit with you because it's not often that I talk to someone who's, got this wealth of knowledge around that, right? And the cultural influence on this art form.
Well, one thing I wanted to point out before we leave the spirituals is that I listened to Lizzo last night, her performance on the Grammys. And while she had a gospel choir around her.
Okay, I have to check it out.
And it was, what's the name of that song? It's About Damn Time.
Yeah.
Which was a really daring move to use the sonic language of the spirituals and gospel music and that sentiment.
Right.
And so this is a great example of what I'm talking about, that these songs can be used to have any meaning that we assign to them. That's one
Mm.
point I wanted to make. But let's move on down the line a little bit, because Black people, particularly in the 19th century, just weren't around picking cotton and singing spirituals. There
Okay.
were many other traditions that were growing up in our history, and one of them I'd like to point out before we leave the 19th century
Yes.
is Black American musical theater, which
Okay.
was very, very important. There were Black performers traversing the continental United States, playing original musicals that they had composed and written, and they would connect with musicians in the cities that they were traveling to as they moved across the continental United States from the West Coast to the East Coast. And there was an entire culture of these extremely, extremely talented people who were trained in classical music and in the traditional forms of African American music, and
Okay.
they lit up the stage with work that is still influential.
Tell me more. What's one that you're fond of in particular?
I have been thinking about and writing about these sisters called the Higher Sisters.
Okay.
Hyer. They were born on the West Coast, and by the 1870s, they were traveling across the country with their musical father, putting on these shows, and they were so talented. One could sing very high as a soprano, one was an alto, and she would often dress and play the male role in the plays, and they were extremely popular. By the time they got to Boston, they were considered stars, and other writers would begin to write vehicles for them because they knew if they had the Higher Sisters in it, it would be a hit.
Okay, so the Higher Sisters. Now,
Yes.
were these a group of sisters or were these a group of friends?
Oh, they were two siblings, indeed.
Okay, are they were they in California?
They were born in California, but
I
they
knew it
spent
was
a
something
lot.
I knew. How did I know that? I mean, I'm from California, and I often say on here that people from California are, real trailblazers, right?
Absolutely.
So this had come about, this is post-Reconstruction that we saw this?
Yes, not post
Okay,
Reconstruction. Some of it was during the Reconstruction that they
okay.
were doing all of this work. And you're absolutely right. The Black culture in California is unique because these people were enslaved. And the same stands true with Philadelphia, where I'm
Yes,
currently
talk about it.
residing. Yeah, they've been, it was 1785 or 6 or something like that when slavery was ended here. And therefore, there was an entirely different musical culture that grew up.
Wow, wow, wow. The Higher Sisters. I'm going to have to put a bookmark on that one and check out these Higher Sisters.
Well, and whatever you do, Google their images because there are photographs.
I was going
And
to ask you, are there actual photographs of these sisters?
absolutely, and they are fly. They were just you're just gonna fall in love with them because you look at them that they were so accomplished and so professional and poised and talented. It'll make you just proud.
So tell me this. So the Higher Sisters, am I going to get that church kind of influence? Like, is that interwoven into you know how a lot of us get our foundation in the Black church, right? Are we getting that? Are we getting some soul? Are we getting some funk? Are we getting, what are they giving?
That's a fascinating question. I have not found any evidence in the written record that their music would sound to our present ears like a gospel or jazz influenced sound.
Okay.
That they were singing probably in that bel canto sound that we hear in opera. They did have a lot of opera in their.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. So
okay.
it's you, and since that there were no recordings of them, obviously, you kind of have to go through the historical record and see how people talked about their music, and how they talked about it is comparing them to the opera stars of the day.
Wow, this is going to be exciting. I'm going to share whatever content I can find with the good people listening about these Higher sisters. I'm curious. I love this.
Indeed.
I'm enjoying this. This is good. This is enriching my spirit. And the fact that these sisters are out of California, which is my home state, is just the icing on the cake, because I tend to think that some real, like I said, trailblazers and innovators and rebels, if you will, come from that side of the world. So let's continue the journey.
Perhaps the next best place to land is the beginning of the recording industry.
Okay.
As we began to have the invention of the gramophone and recording, there were, Black artists who took advantage of that. And one of them was titled, his name, oh man, I'm dropping on his name, but they called him the Whistling Coon.
Not the Whistling Coon.
Yes. And recording executives were looking for something loud and cheap to record.
Yeah.
And he happened to be an formerly enslaved person who was known in his life to be what they call the body person of the young boy of the plantation owner.
Okay.
So he was raised around him, and he learned the tunes that he whistled by listening to that young boy's flute lessons.
Wait a minute. I don't know if I'm following.
Okay.
So the Whistling Coon was the son of the plantation owner?
No, he was the plantation owner's son's body person.
Okay.
So he just accompanied.
He was responsible for him in a way, but he learned how to whistle.
More of a companion. Let's call it that way. Yeah,
okay.
More of a companion. I'm trying to. You see me struggling with this language, right? Because it's very difficult to describe to a modern, person how this happened.
Right. And I'm not, being as though this isn't necessarily, and I need a little patience, because as much as I enjoy music, I even have tattooed. I show you and the good people listening. I don't want nobody saying that I'm on here being a voyeur or anything, but I have tattooed music notes on my shoulder, because music is embedded in everything that I do, like every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't start it and usually end it with music, right? It's so important. It's just intrinsic. It just comes natural to me. Like I grew up listening to, my mom listening to her 45s and, listening to the OJs and Rick James, and, grandma listening to Mahalia Jackson and Aretha Franklin, so it's just a part of my everyday life. So I just need a little patience, because I'm really trying to take this in. So what I'm hearing is this gentleman took advantage of, what he could. He obviously couldn't participate and wasn't being trained, but he mimicked what do we call this companion that he, was responsible for?
The plantation's owner's son.
He was getting these flute lessons, so he learned how to whistle in tunes from that.
Yeah, so he could whistle anything.
Really?
And his name was George Johnson.
And they called him the Whistling Coon.
That was his first record. that
That was his first record. That wasn't how he was identified, but that was his first record.
Of course, he put a record out called The Whistling Coon.
The Whistling Coon.
And, because again, he's taking an advantage of an opportunity where none other existed.
Right.
And it's a fascinating, you can YouTube it up. It's a fascinating piece of music. And the lyrics are absolutely horrible, of course. But one of the things I do as a music historian is to find these stories and try to make sense of them for modern audiences.
No, this is incredible. So there's resistance in that.
Yeah, it's very difficult, but I'm a firm believer in that we really do need to understand and know our past, no matter how difficult we may find it. And we should keep revisiting it and reinterpreting it and resharing it, because if we don't know this past, how can we plan the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm adding him to the list. Good people listening, I got you. I'm going to share all of these, this information with you in the show notes. So where are we now in time? You said the beginning of the recording industry. What year is this?
This is in the late 19th century and moving into the early 20th century.
Okay.
And I suppose the next big stop should be the blues tradition. And we have recordings of those.
Yes, we do.
Of those early blues singers like Bessie Smith and Mamie Smith. And it's what we don't often talk about, though, is that these women were very closely associated with the theater culture of the vaudeville theater culture of the 20th century, where they would travel from, tent shows would travel around. Okay. And Mamie Smith, or was it Mamie Smith, or one of the blues women, not Bessie Smith, but there's a one who would, if you think Beyonce makes a lot of costume changes in Homecoming, these women travel with some outfits. Wow. And that was a big part of the show, the live show, is that you knew you were going to see these glamorous Black women change costumes.
Wow.
and keep it spectacular.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a big part of that. It was not only the musical sounds that they were putting out that were innovative, but how they were presenting
the presentation.
The Black woman's body at that time was absolutely strategic, for their careers.
Was it considered pretty provocative for the times, or?
Well, many of them, I think it was a tension between these big, beautiful gowns and sometimes the kind of ratchet ways that they were, So Little Kim had nothing on them. Okay.
Wow, I gotta check this out. I have got to see this. You say Beyonce didn't have nothing on these sisters.
Yeah, they were innovators, and just think about what it took in the 1920s to be a woman on the road and have show business be
in show business, right?
Yeah. It was not always safe. It was not always a great lifestyle, but they really turned the table for the Black musicians in the early 20th century.
Okay, so tell me this. Where is there a particular place that you have found evidence where where blues originated? Because I've heard a couple of things over the course of my 40-ish, right, years, right? And I don't claim to be a musical historian. Again, it's not every day that I'm talking to somebody with this brain trust. So I'd like to hear from you, where did this sound come from?
Well,
the blues, that is.
Right. If we take just one aspect of the blues to focus on, and that is the vocal inflections that we hear, that we think of as bluesy. And most of those kind of techniques arose out of the cultures that came in contact during the enslaved period. So there's a Western tonal system, do 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 do. That's of the Western major scale.
Yeah.
Because the music from the old world, the Black old world, let's call it, was built on a different kind of scale and inflection. You have these rubs in certain parts of the scale that do this kind of going back and forth in the semitones is what makes us think of it as a bluesy sound. The other component of that is that there is a certain timbre or quality of sound in the vocals.
Right.
They are, you know, a little more throaty, a little more, in some ways, it wasn't considered beautiful singing, you know, to the wider culture, but it's what Black people preferred, this kind of larger range of sounds and ways to use the voice, from guttural, closing the throat and singing nasal on purpose, that the Black tradition finds beauty in. So those two factors come together, and you have what is, you know, typically thought of as a blues sound.
Okay, I love that, because so you're saying that there's different, like my son says when he's playing with his buddies on the video game, there's levels to this.
There's levels.
There's levels. He say there's levels to this, and you ain't on them. You know, so you say that there, and seriously, levels meaning, you know, when you consider the vocals, we haven't even talked about, you know, like the compositions, right?
Right.
When you think about the blues, right? It's, to me, like you described, there has to be it's undeniable, like that connection with, you know, the enslavement of the ancestors, right? My question for you is, given that, and given that we know what that's rooted in, right? And what that means, like, how did this become so palpable and entertaining to the mainstream? You know, is what I've always been curious about.
Well, there's always been this tension between love of the sounds of Black culture, and the social arrangements that kept Black people oppressed on the bottom of the kind of capital of the system in this country. And there's this ability to love and absorb the elements of Black culture, but also want to keep the social arrangements in the status quo.
Right.
But, and you can see this absorption in, I keep bringing up the Grammy since I watched it last night.
Talk about.
You know, if you look at some of the main vocalists, let's think about someone like Adele, who has became famous for the kind of using the kind of highly Americanized version of the belting pop song, which is totally influenced by African American vocalizations. And so you always have that tension, and so this is why we have this concern with what they call cultural appropriation, and it's not a problem with the fact that everybody was listening to Black musicians and absorbing it into the culture. So in fact, that what we call American pop right now is a lot more blackened, if I could use that word, than it was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. You have to sing like a Black singer, in other words, in order to be heard in today's music industry. And frankly, I don't have any problems with its widespread influence, because if it's great, everybody's going to want some. So you
Right.
can't have it both ways. You can't have it be influential and then at the same time police who gets to do it. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Right.
However, what we can do is insist that everybody shares in the fruit that this music it has been able to achieve in the American musical industry. So in other words, everybody should be get paid too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we hear this all the time about, you log on social media and the young people will say, well, you love, Black music and food and culture, but we don't necessarily feel celebrated, right? You embrace aspects of the culture, but you want to do like this, when it comes to, like you say, that inclusion and preserving the stat quo. And, there's always, like you acknowledged, there's always been that tension. It's interesting. So where do we move from the blue? Or are we still on the stop at the blues era?
Let's move on up to the 1940s.
Okay.
If you will. And it happens to be one of my favorite periods to study, this moment when what I think of as the beginnings of the modern civil rights period, right after World War II, when Black soldiers had fought for democracy, in Europe and came back home and they were still on the back of the bus. They were, in fact, many of them were beaten, and when they kind of fully expected to come home and be respected for what they had done. Well, all of that, again, that tension was reflected in the music of the moment. And I'm thinking now of the modern jazz movement of bebop, which was spearheaded by people like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Bud Powell, and Mary Lou Williams, and others. And so you have in that music this idea of what I'm calling Afro-modernism, and that is this very forward-thinking music that was somewhat abstract. It was challenging. It was, you could play it with only if you practiced and put that hard work in. And so it was a modern effort, but it still had the blues feeling from the past. So you can see this this train moving through time, and and Black music is picking up lots of different, let's call it sonic elements from around it. Yeah.
Interesting. The 1940s. Interesting. And you're seeing that play out even now.
Well, if you look at, let's just look at the, again, returning to the Grammys, Robert Glasper project, the Black Radio 3 was voted the best R&B album of the year, but there's many jazz elements from the 1940s in that piece. So this idea of mixing genres and not staying in one's place, if you will, is something that Black musicians are always concerned with.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I'm a big fan of what that brother in particular does with his music. I mean, I'm just a big fan of his. Okay, so this is wonderful. So where is the next stop on this bus?
Well, let's hit the 60s because we're moving back because actually, Robert Glasper's music not only contains R&B and jazz, but it also has gospel, and it also has hip hop production values. So he's really, so he took us all the way up to his time, huh? Yeah, he took us up to 2023. He took us back.
Oh yeah. I think that the 60s is one of my favorites. So I'm excited to hear you talk about the 60s.
One of the things I love about the 60s, because of course, when I came of age, I remember the Motown songs being played around the house. I remember the jazz of the 60s, like John Coltrane, being played around the house. I remember dancing in the street and all that, and this idea that that integration could have a sound, that we could have the political force of demanding equality, demanding that the world accept Diana Ross and the Supremes as an example of modern glamour.
Yeah.
When the only Black women who were televised were playing maids. So this was, even though it's just baby love, and stop in the name of love and all of that, it wasn't all about love. It was also about, we are here, we are impeccably trained, we can do like the Temptations did and have choreographed dances that were second to no Broadway show. We could send this music around the world. We could make white teenagers fall in love with it and listen. We could play this music in halls where they had ropes between Black and white people. And by the time that concert was over, that rope had come down and everybody was just doing their thing. Hey. So the 1960s was a very, very powerful moment in the history of African-American music.
Absolutely, hands down, hands down. Is there any one particular record that came out of the 60s that you think was particularly influential or characteristic of some of the churn, some of the social justice movements? And
yeah, I would choose two. One is Curtis Mayfield's "We Are Winner."
Yes.
Which is just such a powerful song with a lot of sentiment. And I remember hearing that song played. I'm from Chicago, and I remember the kind of, it's a very segregated place. I remember that song being somewhat of an anthem. Okay. Another piece that I would point out is John Coltrane's song "Alabama," which he wrote in response to the Birmingham, Alabama bombing of the church.
The four little girls.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Yeah, the four little girls. I was watching a documentary that talked about John Coltrane and how he really did leverage his gift and skill to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like that music that brother was producing at that time, like the resistance is there, right? Like those compositions. And I mean, like he was really using his art form, as a strong rebuke on what was going on at that time. And being as though, I'm younger, I mean, that music, preceded me. I mean, that's not something that I knew. It took me to learn these things and go back and listen with a different ear. But that brother was, he was using his art form to really sound off. And that was a hallmark.
Indeed. And what's fascinating about that is he was playing instrumental music for the most part. So the challenge becomes when you're playing instrumental music. I mean, it's one thing to say and sing "We're a Winner." It's another thing to play "We're a Winner."
Absolutely.
And have people interpret it as such. So this is one of the profound gifts of our music that you just pointed out, that it doesn't have to be lyrics that give you that sense of freedom that people like John Coltrane wanted the world to feel.
Absolutely. So where is this next stop on the bus? We only got a few more stops on the bus in the interest of time.
I don't know. Where should we go from here?
Let's talk about the 70s.
I think the 70s for me, anyway, there's a lot going on there.
Lots.
Yeah. But
we're going to stop with the 70s.
Okay. One of the things about the 70s that had the most profound impact on Black music was that the corporatization of the music began to go in force, because you had people like Berry Gordy and the people from different regions starting record labels that catered to Black musicians and Black audiences. When that music began to sell, then the major labels got interested in it and
Right.
started to sign artists to these labels. And sometimes what would happen is that the autonomy that some of the artists enjoyed was taken away because it became corporatized, it became streamlined, and you had record executives telling, artists what they needed to do to fulfill this contract.
Right.
Rather than, just going on what the artist would think about. And you had a lot of
their creative contributions, right?
Yeah. And then there's also the fusion aspect. Jazz began to fuse with rock and roll. It began to fuse with funk music, which was beginning to come of age. And funk.
And where did that funk come from for the folks that are watching that aren't so educated about that?
Well, funk music is a recipe, as I call it. It's just the ostinato recurring bass that goes around and round and round,
yes,
and repeats. Like, you just think of James Brown's Licking Stick, and that's the whole bass line of the whole song. And every other part, that the interesting part has to be added by your booty, shaken to that ostinato pattern. Then you had these horn lines that intersected with the bass line. And it's all an intersecting puzzle, locked in. And once it starts, it moves through the entire record that way. And the musical interest is primarily assigned to the amazing vocals that the lead singer had to do in order to keep a repeating pattern interesting.
You know what just came to my mind was Ray Parker Jr. and Shaka Khan.
Absolutely.
As you're talking, what is that song that I'm thinking, you got the love? And I just hear Ray Parker just tearing that guitar up, that bass guitar. Give me the strength to keep on living. Man.
Yeah.
Listen, don't play with me because I'll turn it on. That's one of my favorite records. And the reason I was hinting about, this whole funk thing is because, again, I have operated under the belief that there was a strong current of influence from the Bay Area, which happens to be where I'm from, right? Where Sly and, Sly and the Family Stone. But I know that he got put on by, who was it? He got put on by James Brown, right? Or was it Isaac Hayes? I can't remember.
I can't remember the details of his career. I think
it was James Brown.
But there were a lot of West Coast innovations from the Hawkins singers and, Sly Stone and all that. But we have to remember that gradually what has happened through our ability to get music instantly on the internet and recordings that are readily available all over the country at the same time, you have some local cultures that remain intact, but for the most part, this culture is shared across what I call the Black archipelago, meaning the system of cities where Black people reside, where there's all this cultural traffic going on, where we might be listening to the same things, but making different things, different meanings out of it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So you might have a record drop, and the teenagers in Philadelphia are doing one dance to it, and people in Chicago doing another dance. And it's not until everybody gets together like, no, that's not what we're doing, but what y'all doing? That kind of thing. So it's a fascinating thing to have the music mass mediated to the degree that it has. And another thing about funk that's very important is that it is the dance music of planet Earth.
Okay.
I don't care where you go. whether it's African High Life with Fela, whether it's in Finland where they really love funk music. It's those
Not
songs.
Finland and loving funk music out in Finland.
Yes, ma'am. If you don't know now, you know.
I do know now, and I need to see this.
Oh, there's some amazing gospel choirs in Seoul, Korea. You close your eyes and you would never know you weren't on the south
Dr.
side of Chicago.
Ramsey, you got to listen. You said in Seoul, Korea, I could close my eyes and I would think that I was in Mississippi.
Yes, ma'am. South
Carolina.
Yes, ma'am.
Alabama.
Yes, ma'am.
Arkansas.
Wherever you want to go. And this is it's the pervasiveness, it's the appeal, and people are making their own meanings out of it. That's the beautiful part, is that they may be aware of how African Americans think about this music, but they are absorbing that and adding their own cultural intentions to the music. And sonically, they have studied all of it to such a degree that they would come over here and tear up any church.
So you telling me that it's a choir, because I'm still here in Seoul, Korea, and we about to get out of here, that'll, do a Chicago. I mean, y'all have some fine choirs out of Chicago. Yes, I'm a fan of Ricky Dillard and, what he does with those choirs. And anywho, well, I'm just going to thank you for stopping by and taking this journey with us down, the land of music. Tell them about the book, Dr. Ramsey. Tell them about the book.
You see, that funk makes you lose your mind.
It does. Tell them about the book.
This is my new book, Who Hears Here, which is available at all of your fine bookstores and in any place you buy your books online. It is a collection of my essays about Black music, ranging from the late 19th century to the present, written over the last 25 years of my career. My latest book, Who Hears Here?
I love it. Get that book, good people. I hope you've appreciated this wealth of knowledge and this musical journey as we continue all Black everything on the Black Fundraisers Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this segment of Black influence on music in America. Until next week, good people, stay tuned, stay down, and keep your head up.